Before we start this video, I just wanted to mention that only 15% of you are subscribed, so if you enjoy the content, please hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. In this video, we're going to be discussing Tom Riddle, aka Lord Voldemort, murderer of the Potters, nemesis of the wizarding world, and master of dark magic. In the year 1926, Voldemort was born Tom Marvolo Riddle, the son of pureblood witch Merope Gaunt and wealthy muggle Tom Riddle Sr. His mother, Merope Gaunt, was a member of the pureblood Gaunt family. The Gaunt family were direct descendants of Salazar Slytherin, one of the extremely powerful four founders of Hogwarts. Merope lived with Marvolo Gaunt, her father, and Tom's grandfather, as well as Morphine Gaunt, Voldemort's uncle. The family lived in extreme poverty, the result of centuries of inbreeding, instability, and violence within the family. Tom Riddle Sr. hailed from the Riddle family, a wealthy muggle family that had inhabited the Hangleton villages for many years. The Riddle family were disliked among the townsfolk, the result of snobbish and arrogant behaviour, most likely stemming from their wealth. Voldemort was conceived because his mother, Merope, used a love potion on his father, Tom. When Merope eventually released Tom from the trance that he'd been placed under, he fled, wanting nothing to do with Merope or his son. This led to Merope falling into a deep and dark depression, a state that eventually brought her to Wool's Orphanage in London. It was at Wool's Orphanage in the year 1926 that Lord Voldemort was born. He was named Tom Marvolo Riddle, Tom after his father, Marvolo after his grandfather, and Riddle, which was his father's family name. So, being named after your father or grandfather is fairly common, and the name Tom Marvolo Riddle is not particularly outlandish, so how did he get Voldemort out of that? Where did the name Voldemort come from? Tom Riddle recognized at a very young age that he was different than others, having caused all sorts of trouble at Wool's Orphanage before eventually being brought to Hogwarts by Professor Albus Dumbledore. Because Tom was conceived via a love potion, he never had the capacity to feel love, or the emotions that a normal person might feel. This led him down a very dark path, a path that he only embraced. Riddle, obsessed with where he had come from, began to research his family history, and eventually came to understand his relationship to Hogwarts founder Salazar Slytherin. He also connected the dots and was able to figure out who his blood family members were. This brought him back to Little Hangleton, the same town that his father, Tom Riddle Sr., as well as the Gaunts lived. Riddle, angered by the way that he and his mother had been treated, ended up murdering his, in his own words, filthy muggle father, and placed the blame on his uncle Morphine, who was promptly sent to Azkaban. He then returned to Hogwarts, and it was at this time that he discovered the Chamber of Secrets. This only perpetuated the dark path that he had begun to follow. And Riddle, recognizing that he was the descendant of Slytherin, set the Basilisk inside of the Chamber of Secrets loose on students in an attempt to cleanse the school of muggle-borns. It was at this time that Voldemort had fully adopted the name Lord Voldemort, as by this point he had fully embraced the darkness and no longer wanted to be recognized by his father's name. He had put that part of his existence behind him entirely, and didn't want to be associated with his father, who he believed to be a filthy muggle. Tom didn't like any of his names, and was very open about it from a very young age. In The Half-Blood Prince, Riddle says to Dumbledore, very irritably, "There are a lot of Toms." Voldemort had great aspirations, and wanted a name that was anything but common. For this reason, his new identity, Lord Voldemort, was born. Lord has impositions of grandeur, and a complete lack of commonality, and Voldemort just sounds inherently sinister and fear-inciting. In the Chamber of Secrets, it is revealed that Voldemort's full real name, Tom Marvolo Riddle, is an anagram for I am Lord Voldemort. His name, though it seems fairly arbitrary, actually makes sense in many different ways. Let's start by breaking down all of the aspects of his name to see what he's getting at. The first explanation for his name, which has been confirmed by J.K. Rowling, is that Voldemort, broken apart, is Vol-de-Mort, which literally translates to theft of death or flight of death in French. Many believe that this choice of name is in reference to Voldemort's evasion of death via the use of Horcruxes. By splitting his soul into pieces, Voldemort effectively achieved immortality, subsequently stripping death of the capacity to take Voldemort's life force or soul. In 2019, Rowling actually apologized to French readers for naming the primary antagonist and most evil character a French name. "I want to thank my French readers for not resenting my choice of a French name for my evil character," she said in fluent French, at a ceremony during which she received the award from President Nicolas Sarkozy. "I can assure you that no anti-French feeling was at the origin of this choice," she said. "As a Francophile, I have always been proud of my French blood, but I needed a name that evokes both power and exoticism, she said of Voldemort. Voldemort himself is 100% English, she added. While the name Voldemort being French makes a lot of sense, it would be ignorant to ignore the commonalities between Latin and French, as from a Latin standpoint we can derive more about the name Lord Voldemort. The French language is derived from Latin, as it evolved in the area known to the Romans as Gaul. Because of this, most French vocabulary comes from Latin. They just look and sound quite different because the French language has undergone a lot of phonetic changes. Bearing that in mind, let's break down the name Voldemort from a Latin perspective. In Latin, Voldemort's name would be Volo de Morte. Volo roughly translates to I wish, de is away from, and morte, which is the ablative form of mort, means death. This would mean that the name, broken down, literally translates to I wish away from death, which effectively has the same meaning as the French flight of death. It all just seems to point to one thing: Voldemort is trying to cheat death. We also see the Latin mors in the spell mors mordre, which is an incantation used by Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters to create an image of the Dark Mark. The Dark Mark is the calling card of Death Eaters, and is usually cast over the homes of anyone that they may have killed or tyrannized. Mors mordre, broken apart, contains the Latin mors, which means death, and morder, which means bite. Bite of death. Ooh, sounds sinister. Continuing to break the name apart, it is also worth noting that Vold translates to danger or violence in Germanic languages, such as Norwegian. This, in conjunction with mort, which is death in Latin, gives off a kind of a danger-death vibe, which simultaneously comes across in two different families of languages. As such, a large number of people would be able to get an inherently dangerous or deadly connotation from the name, and help to give them a sense of what the character is like before actually becoming familiar with him. The Riddle portion of Voldemort's original name, Tom Riddle, has also been loosely tied to the creation of his new name. Because Tom Riddle's full name, Tom Marvolo Riddle, is an anagram for I am Lord Voldemort, it could be expressed that his name, in and of itself, is a riddle, which refers to an enigma or brain teaser. Though it isn't touched on publicly very often, if you dig deeply into the names of the characters in Harry Potter, you can clearly see that there was a lot of effort put in. J.K. Rowling, author, linguist, and professed lover of the classics, used Latin and Greek roots in many places throughout the series. If you dig deep enough, you can see that most of the names were quite methodically chosen. We can see this in the names of Sirius, which refers to Alpha Canis Majoris, or the dog star, Albus, which is Latin for white, and alludes to Dumbledore's age and sagaciousness, Minerva, which is a goddess of wisdom and war in Greek mythology, Lupin, which is related to lupus or wolf in Latin, and Alistair, which refers to the avenger of evil deeds in Greek mythology. As you can see, all of these character names have roots in Greek or Latin, and in almost all instances, their names are extremely fitting. It's highly improbable that the relationships between these names and their Greek or Latin associations came out of coincidence. In fact, just researching this has inspired me to make a full video on etymology in Harry Potter. One other interesting fan theory that I've heard of is that Voldemort was named after an evil wizard named Voldemortist, who hails from the legends of Merlin. Voldemortist means Lord of Evil, and the dark wizard Voldemortist was responsible for trying to destroy the famous wizard Merlin from the time of King Arthur. Merlin, a charms master, easily stopped Voldemortist with a paralyzing charm and fed him to a mythical beast. One other theory that I've heard about Voldemort's name that is a huge stretch is that because his real name Tom comes from the name Thomas, which means twin, he has a twin. This one is definitely a bit much for me. However, I do think that it references the commonality of the name Tom, and highlights Voldemort's strong desire to get away from that name, in pursuit of something more grand. Wherever his name comes from, and whichever meaning is most applicable, what I find most interesting about his name is that there was seemingly a lot involved when coming up with it. I wonder if it was J.K. Rowling's intention from the start to have I am Lord Voldemort set up as an anagram for Tom Marvolo Riddle. Additionally, it's interesting that with such a heavy behind-the-scenes focus on his name, he's referred to by other names for the majority of the books and films. Everyone's saying, you know who, the Dark Lord, and he who must not be named, but Voldemort? Only the bravest, or perhaps most foolish, seem to be saying that. Regardless of what he's called, there's one thing that we all need to remember. Fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself. And that's it for this video. If you enjoy the content, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or thoughts about his name, then feel free to comment them down below. Until next time, you're a wizard, Harry!